Hi everyone, welcome to week number 6 of our course. This is your welcome video for week 6 to introduce some of the concepts from this week and to wrap up what we had done in week number 5. I'm still going through the assignments in week 5 as they come in and reviewing those and looking at your training videos. And so thank you for those assignments, and I'll get those back to you as quickly as I can. This week we're going to continue our discussion of employee development, whereas last week we talked a lot about training and how to assign employees to training programs and what types of training programs to use and the most effective methods for training employees. This week, we're going to look at how you identify the performance inefficiencies to begin with that then recommend the need for training. So in other words, this week, we're going to be looking at performance appraisal and performance evaluation. Performance evaluation is really the linchpin of the entire personnel management function. And there's a very famous article many years ago by a person by the name of Charles Fox. And Fox in his article argued that performance appraisals are really the keystone, if you will, of the entire process of managing human resources. And as you know, if you look at an arch, for instance, that very top stone in the arch that holds all the other stones together, that top stone at the very top of the arch is known as the keystone. You remove that keystone, all the other blocks will collapse, there will be no more arch. And so Fox argues that performance evaluation and appraisal serves as that keystone that holds everything together. It holds together recruitment, it holds together selection and allocation, holds together sanctioning and discipline and training and development. And without a good system of performance appraisal, you just simply cannot manage your human resources. Now we know that there is some hesitation on the part of both supervisors as well as subordinates to engage in performance evaluation. Subordinates oftentimes fear and do not want to engage in performance evaluation because of the concern over what we call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when an employee believes that he or she is doing a good job, and then they get their performance evaluation and it doesn't tell them that. Their performance evaluation is very critical, and they're surprised by the negative feedback that they are receiving. Creates this cognitive dissonance, makes it very difficult for those employees to embrace the results of the evaluation and then incorporate those results to improve their performance on the job. But it's not only subordinates who fear and really don't like to engage in performance appraisal, but superiors also tend to shy away from performance appraisal because there's a concern about the stakes that are associated with performance evaluation, that the stakes are so high in that people, based upon their performance evaluation, they may not get a promotion, they may not get a reclassification, they may not get the perks that they are looking for, or in the extreme situation, they may actually end up being sanctioned and terminated based upon their evaluation results. And so those are very high stakes for superiors. And so sometimes they are led to commit errors such as you'll read about this week, things like a halo effect, where they're scoring everyone very high just to avoid some of those negative repercussions. So it's very important in performance evaluation to build this support and build this culture of trust so that superiors and subordinates alike will be willing to participate. As you'll see in your readings this week, one of the main ways in which you build that rapport and build that trust is through involvement. Much like a Mary Parker Follett approach, you want through participation to get your employees involved in the design of the evaluation process. So for instance, if you're going to be using peer evaluations or a 360-degree evaluation, that's not something that you can just ordain from top down. That is something that your employees need to participate in the development of, because the more they participate in the development of the process, the more likely they are to trust the results of that process. So employee buy-in is extremely important in constructing your performance evaluation process. It's also important in performance evaluation, as you'll see this week, to use the appropriate evaluation tool. Now, this week, you'll be exposed to a variety of different performance evaluation forms and tools. There is no magic bullet. There is no one approach that is by far the best in every situation. But like everything else in public administration, your choice of the performance evaluation tool will depend upon the situation that you are operating within. So at times you'll be able to use what's called a graphic rating system. And you're familiar with those graphic rating systems before, where you'll have your ordinal categories of excellent or above average, average, so on and so on. Those Likert ordinal response categories will then be selected based upon whatever behavior you are measuring. The nice thing about a graphic rating type of system is that it's relatively easy for a manager to complete. There's not a whole lot of time involved in completing that. The downside, obviously, is there are a few. The first downside is employees, if they are only using a graphic rating system, they are not getting narrative substantive feedback on their performance. So they may get a check mark in the category of average. Well, that's better than being below average, but you're not getting a lot of feedback in terms of how to move from the average category to the above average category or to the excellent category in future evaluation cycles. So a lack of feedback is a problem. Another problem, whenever you use Likert ordinal categories to rate the performance of employees, you always have the introduction of error. And one of the errors I've already mentioned is this idea that, well, they'll just score everyone very high. And that will help them avoid any of these negative repercussions, make everyone happy. Well, obviously, that's an invalid evaluation. There's also what's called the recency effect, whereby managers will evaluate the performance of their employees based upon their most recent interaction with them. And so if they had a positive interaction last week, well, this person's going to get a good evaluation. If they ran into a conflict with the person last week, they'll get a poor evaluation. So that recency effect can be a problem. There's a regression to the mean effect, whereby some managers will just shoot for that average column and just give everyone the average score because it then gives them some place to go and some way to improve in future evaluations. So there are a myriad of problems that are associated with graphic rating, but a lot of organizations use graphic rating because it is simple, it's very easy to complete. If you're only using graphic rating in isolation without any other approach to complement it, it's probably going to be insufficient to actually correct and rectify any poor performance patterns. So usually what folks will do is they will combine the graphic rating approach with maybe an essay format. So you'll not just get your Likert ordinal categories, but then you'll also get some narrative feedback in terms of the specific behaviors that the employee is engaging in, and those behaviors that are good for performance, in behaviors that employees should be engaging in to improve performance, goals and objectives for future evaluation periods. All that can then be in that essay component that can be coupled with your graphic rating system. The approach that I always like to use, and that a lot of organizations have moved toward, is presented to you in your readings as well, and that's a BARS approach, a behaviorally anchored rating scale approach. With a behaviorally anchored rating scale approach, it's kind of similar to a grading rubric that you're going to see in a course syllabus, in that you will specify, here are the specific behaviors that will lead to a certain type of rating. So to get an excellent rating, the employee may need to, if it's a employee that's working in an office that deals with a lot of correspondence, that person may need to complete all correspondence on time, all correspondence is completed without any errors. That could be a superior type of rating. But if you exhibit that performance, then you can expect to get a superior rating. An above average rating would be a tick below that, and so the behavior might be minimal errors, maybe one error per 20 pieces of correspondence or whatever the case may be, but it allows the employee to know specifically, if I exhibit this behavior will then lead to this desired rating. If they receive an average rating, then they'll read the behavior and they'll know they got the average rating because they exhibited this behavior as opposed to the behavior required for an above average or an excellent rating. So behaviorally anchored rating scales have become very popular. The downside is that they are more difficult to produce. They take a lot more time to produce, but they do provide some substantive feedback that will not only allow employees to improve their performance, but also build some trust into the process, because it's clearly not just an arbitrary ordinal ranking. There is some behavior that that ordinal ranking is anchored to. So we probably see this more recently than we've ever seen it in the past, becoming a very popular way of evaluating our employees. For this week, again, you'll read about some other approaches. I don't want to take too much time going through all the details because you get to read all of that. But I do want to point out to you that this week you've got 2 primary assignments that you are going to be working on, in addition to continuing the work on your critical assignment that's due coming up very quickly, because this course is going by very fast. But the one assignment you have this week is this multimedia discussion board assignment that you have grown very familiar with. I don't know if you're very fond of them, but I'm sure you're familiar with them up to this point in time. And for this multimedia discussion board presentation, you are going to be focusing on the Hatch Act. And you're all probably familiar with the Hatch Act, and you understand the idea of political neutrality for public employees. The federal Hatch Act that place limitations on the types of political activities that employees can engage in while either at work or in their capacity as a public employee, or using resources from their public employer. You are limited in those capacities in terms of the types of political activities that you may engage in. Now, there are other things that you can do from a political perspective that are not prohibited. And so if you put a political bumper sticker or on your car and you park that car in a state government parking lot, that's completely acceptable, because that is your personal car and you are allowed to have that type of advertisement on your car, even though it's on state property. You are allowed to wear a pin or a button as long as you are not coming into contact with the public or with clients. But when it comes to things such as using public resources or campaigning while you are on public time, or campaigning at your public workplace, or using your public title and endorsements and campaign literature, those are the types of things that are off limit as a result of the Hatch Act. And then what we call the Little Hatch Acts. And after the passage of the Hatch Act, states across the country started adopting their own Little Hatch Acts. And we have a lot of those here in California, things like the Political Responsibility Act, the PRA, and others that will limit the political activities of state and local employees while they are on the job or while they are using public resources. So for this discussion board, you're going to put together a PowerPoint, narrated PowerPoint presentation where you will review the Hatch Act and the limitations that the Hatch Act places upon public employees, and then you will take a position either supporting or opposing this concept of limiting the political activities of public employees. So both, it'll be informative in terms of what the Hatch Act is all about and how the Hatch Act limits activities. And then it'll also be a persuasive element where you will take a position either supporting or opposing those types of limitations. As always, again, it'll be a narrated PowerPoint presentation, a minimum of 3 slides, title slide, content slide, closing slide. You can go beyond those 3 slides, certainly, but that is the minimum requirement. And then post that into discussion board, and then respond to at least 2 of your classmates' PowerPoints and provide some professional feedback and some professional comments on their post as well. So again, you've gotten pretty familiar with the drill up to this point in time. So that's one assignment here for week 6. Then your second assignment for week 6 is, again, a reflective journal posting, kind of like what you did last week. For this reflective journal posting, you're going to be dealing with the comparison of trait-based versus behavior-based performance evaluation. And we'll spend a lot of time this week reading about the differences between trait-based and behavior-based evaluation. In this reflective journal, you will compare the strengths and weaknesses of those 2 appraisal systems, trait-based versus behavior-based. You will tell me which you believe to be best for public sector human resource management, and then support your answer. As always, justify why you think that approach is the most appropriate in most situations in the public sector. Again, this is a journal posting, and so you don't have to worry much about the APA formatting and all those types of requirements. Do make sure that you have It's devoid of grammatical errors, and proofread it just like any other assignment that you would submit. You just don't have to adhere to the formal paper requirements that we adhere to for our written assignments. Typical length, a couple of pages, I think is certainly sufficient for that. So you'll be posting that then again in the journal as your journal entry. So the multimedia discussion board presentation on Hatch Act, what it is, if you support it or not, and then a reflective journal entry comparing the strengths and weaknesses of trait-based versus behavior-based evaluation, and advocating which of those two approaches you think is most appropriate in the public sector. So that's it for this week. So a little less work this week than probably what you had in week number 5. As always, if you have any questions at all about any of the assignments, feel free to either email me or post a question in the Q&A link in the website. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great week, and I look forward to reading your work. So take care.